The United States government just banned one of Anthropic's most advanced AI models, and the tech industry basically shrugged. Fable 5, Anthropic's latest multimodal large language model, hit a federal restriction in early June 2026. The Department of Commerce issued new export controls, citing national security concerns around advanced reasoning capabilities and potential dual-use risks. But here's what nobody expected. The ban didn't actually slow anyone down. Downloads are up. Developer adoption is climbing across startups and enterprises alike. Enterprise deployment hasn't budged, it just moved offshore. It's like the government tried to stop a freight train by posting a sign, and the train just drove straight through. On the surface, this looks like a regulatory victory for national security hawks who've been pushing harder restrictions on cutting-edge AI systems. But the numbers tell a completely different story, one that challenges everything policymakers thought they knew about controlling technology. If anything, Fable 5 restriction proved something uncomfortable. You can't ban what the entire world actually wants to use. The real question isn't whether Anthropic, developers, and enterprises will find workarounds. They already have. The real question is what this means for AI policy itself going forward. If governments can't actually enforce restrictions through bans, then what's even the point? And here's where it gets interesting. To understand why the government went after Fable 5, you need to know what makes it different from earlier models. Fable 5 isn't just another chatbot upgrade. It's a multimodal reasoning engine that can analyze images, video, and text all at once, then reason about all three together. That's actually quite powerful. It can look at a circuit board photograph, understand the topology, and suggest improvements. It can analyze medical imaging and spot diagnostic patterns. It can read source code and identify architectural weaknesses. The government's concern is straightforward. What if this reasoning ability gets weaponized? Bioweapons design, malware creation, cyber attack optimization. That's the national security argument. The restrictions weren't random. They came after months of input from intelligence agencies and internal policy debates at Commerce. The fear was simple. By letting Fable 5 spread freely, America was handing over a strategic advantage in reasoning AI. Other countries have their own models, but this one was seen as particularly capable. So the government did what governments do. They tried to control distribution. Export controls, restricted access, partnerships with Anthropic to limit downloads. On paper, it looked like smart policy. In reality, it collided with how global tech adoption actually works. So what did the ban actually look like on the ground? The Commerce Department classified Fable 5 under new AI export control categories in their interim rules. That means persons and companies couldn't export it to most countries without a special license. But here's the thing, Anthropic is a domestic company, so they still sold access to it domestically. What actually changed was the licensing requirement for cross-border distribution. In practice, that meant enterprise customers in Europe and Asia had to request government approval. Some got licenses. Many didn't wait around. They simply spun up mirror instances on servers located outside the United States. The restriction instantly became symbolic rather than binding. Individual developers accessed it through VPNs or proxies without breaking a sweat. It's not particularly sophisticated. It's just what people naturally do when regulations make something inconvenient rather than impossible. The bigger insight, Fable 5 was already distributed before the ban took effect. Millions of developers had copies running locally. You can't unring that bell. The restriction only affected new downloads and commercial licensing, not copies already in circulation. So the government essentially locked the barn door after all the horses had bolted. But here's what the headlines aren't telling you. Here's where the story gets really uncomfortable for policymakers. Within just weeks of the ban taking effect, Anthropic released official adoption metrics that essentially said the restriction did absolutely nothing to slow down Fable 5's spread. Developer downloads of Fable 5 actually increased week over week compared to the period before the ban. Commercial licenses signed by enterprise customers went up as well. GitHub repositories using Fable 5 API showed a steeper adoption curve after the restrictions took hold than before they were announced. It's almost as if telling developers you can't have this made them want it even more. The data was genuinely stunning. One independent analyst tracking API usage patterns reported that 67% of Fortune 500 companies that previously used Anthropic's models were still accessing Fable 5 capabilities after the ban, just through alternative routes and workarounds. Some ran instances on rented servers in other countries. Others partnered with foreign distributors who weren't subject to these controls. A few likely used less official channels, though obviously nobody talks about that in earnings calls. The real point, the government tried to create scarcity, but scarcity requires actual enforcement power. What they got was inconvenience, and inconvenience pushes smart engineers toward creative solutions. And this is where things get surprising. This isn't the first time America tried to regulate its way out of a technology problem. Back in 2015, the Commerce Department restricted military-grade encryption export for the same national security reason. The result? Developers switched to open-source algorithms like GPG that were already freely available. You can't uninvent something published. Or look at drones. When the government restricted high-end consumer drones, the market flooded with nearly identical foreign alternatives. DJI drones made in China dominate the market anyway. The pattern is consistent. Restriction plus global distribution equals unenforceable policy. Fable 5 is the same story. It's software. Once software exists, controlling who uses it is like stopping water flowing downhill. It just finds the path of least resistance. The difference this time is the stakes. Fable 5 could theoretically enable bioweapon design or cyber attacks. Those worries might be legitimate, but legitimate concern doesn't change the fundamental math. You cannot ban a tool that's already everywhere. When the cat's out of the bag, regulatory barriers just redirect its path instead of stopping it. They create friction, but not prevention. The real question becomes, if you can't enforce restrictions through bans, what's your actual policy lever? Here's the thing that changes everything. So what does the Fable 5 ban teach us about the future of AI regulation? The first lesson is pretty stark. Blanket bans don't work on software. They never have, and they never will. What governments actually need is international cooperation. You can't regulate your way out of a global technology unless your allies are enforcing the same rules. That means treaties, coordination, agreements with Europe, Asia, and other major tech centers to collectively restrict dangerous capabilities. Single-country bans are theater. They make politicians look tough on national security without actually changing anything on the ground. The second lesson is about the nature of AI itself. Unlike nuclear weapons or biological agents, AI models are information. They are software. The moment one country develops a capability, it can be stolen, reverse-engineered, or legally copied by researchers in open-source communities worldwide. You can restrict distribution all you want, but you can't restrict knowledge. That's a fundamental property of how information works. The third lesson, and this one's the kicker, bans might actually accelerate the very thing governments are trying to prevent. When you tell developers you can't use this tool, some of them build alternative tools. Some of them get more creative about potential dual-use applications. Prohibition breeds incentive. That's not unique to AI. It's been true of every technology humans have tried to ban. But here's where the real policy change needs to happen. So here's what's actually happening right now, in practice, with real people and companies dealing with this ban. Anthropic itself took a measured approach. They're complying with the export controls where they legally have to, but they're also being pretty clear with investors that domestic demand remains strong and international workarounds are limiting revenue impact to maybe 8 to 12%. That's not exactly the disruption policymakers were hoping for. Universities and research labs, most just shrug and run Fable 5 on their own hardware or cloud instances outside the United States. It's perfectly legal for a British university to download and run it. It's legal for a Japanese research lab to do the same. The ban doesn't actually apply to them. Tech startups are more creative. Some have relocated teams to Canada or Europe specifically to maintain Fable 5 access without navigating licensing delays. That's a real cost, but it's apparently worth it to them. The bigger companies with global infrastructure, they just partition their operations by geography. European teams access it through European servers, Asian teams through Asian servers. It's a workaround, but it's effective. And none of this is technically illegal, it's just geographically smart. The real message here is that restrictions without enforcement are just speed bumps. So here's what this all really means. The Fable 5 ban didn't actually fail because the Commerce Department didn't try hard enough. It failed because you simply cannot ban a technology that's already distributed globally. That's a fundamental property of how software works. That's not an argument against trying to regulate AI at all. Real risks exist that are absolutely worth managing. But it is an argument for being completely honest about what regulation can actually accomplish. Export controls might slow adoption in specific countries. They might delay enterprise deployment by a few months, but they don't stop adoption. They don't erase knowledge. They don't create the scarcity policymakers hope for. What actually works is fundamentally different. International cooperation on safety standards, transparency requirements for powerful systems, real monitoring of dangerous use cases, liability frameworks where companies bear actual responsibility for dual-use harms. Those are harder to implement than a simple ban, but they are genuinely enforceable. Here's the key takeaway: AI wars aren't being won or lost by government bans anymore. They're won by whoever innovates fastest, deploys most effectively, and earns user trust. Anthropic is winning that war right now. Fable 5 adoption proves it. The real question for 2026 and beyond is whether regulators keep trying to control technology through restriction or finally change toward accountability and safety standards that actually work. Follow for daily AI news.